Right now, something strange is unfolding in Washington, and it could ripple into your life, your family's future, and even your wallet. Because when powerful politicians make mistakes, the consequences don't stay in the headlines. They trickle down to everyday Americans. And this time, the controversy involves one of the most explosive topics in modern politics, the Epstein files. What was supposed to be a political move by Republicans to pressure investigations and score points in a high-stakes political battle has suddenly turned into a moment that could backfire in a big way. The story is moving fast. Details are still emerging, and what seemed like a calculated strategy is now being described as a political misstep that could change the narrative overnight. Imagine waking up to find out that the people you voted for, or the ones who promised to protect your interests, just made a move that could shake the entire political landscape. That's the tension building right now. Because this isn't just about political drama. It's about trust, transparency, and the way decisions in Washington can create economic uncertainty, policy delays, and even legal battles that affect benefits, taxes, and the stability of the country. The Epstein files have always been surrounded by mystery, secrecy, and intense public interest, but now a political maneuver has turned the spotlight in an unexpected direction. And suddenly, the story is no longer going the way many in Washington planned. And here's the twist. What started as a strategy to target opponents may now be creating problems for allies. That's why this moment is getting so much attention, and why millions of Americans are starting to ask the same question: what happens next? How the situation began. To understand what's happening now, you have to go back to how this situation started. For years, the Epstein case has been one of the most controversial and sensitive topics in American public life. It involved powerful names, high-profile investigations, and a constant demand from the public for more transparency. People across the political spectrum have wanted answers. They've wanted to know who knew what, when they knew it, and why so many questions still remain unanswered. Recently, political pressure intensified around releasing more information connected to the case. Some lawmakers argued that the American people deserved to see everything. Every document, every name, every detail that could help bring clarity to a story that has left many feeling uneasy and distrustful of institutions. The idea was simple on the surface: push for more disclosure, more investigations, and more accountability. But politics is rarely simple. Moves that seem straightforward can have hidden consequences. And in this case, what looked like a push for transparency quickly turned into something more complicated. Because once you start opening files connected to powerful figures, you can't always control what comes out or who ends up being connected to the story. That's where things started to shift. What was meant to be a political strategy began to look like a risky gamble. And as details started to circulate, it became clear that the situation wasn't unfolding the way some had expected. The political strategy behind it. In Washington, every move has a strategy behind it. Every press conference, every statement, every investigation request is part of a larger chess game. And in this case, the strategy appeared to be focused on applying pressure. By pushing for more Epstein-related documents and investigations, some lawmakers believed they could force uncomfortable questions onto their political opponents. The idea was that transparency would expose wrongdoing and potentially damage rival political figures. It was a classic political play. Highlight controversy, demand answers, and let public outrage do the rest. For many supporters, it sounded like a strong stand for accountability. For critics, it looked like a political weapon disguised as a transparency effort. But here's the problem with that approach. Once you open the door to full transparency, you don't get to choose which names appear. You don't get to control the narrative, and you certainly don't get to guarantee that the fallout will only hit your opponents. That's where the strategy began to show cracks, because reports and discussions started hinting that the move could bring uncomfortable attention to figures on the same side of the political aisle. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a political advantage started to look like a possible liability. And in politics, perception matters just as much as reality. Once the story began shifting, the narrative changed from exposing opponents to creating problems for allies. And that shift is what has people talking right now. why this matters to you. You might be wondering, why should this matter to you or your family? After all, this sounds like another political fight in Washington. But the truth is, these kinds of political battles have real-world consequences. When political chaos erupts, it often leads to stalled legislation, delayed economic policies, and uncertainty in markets and government programs. Think about it. If Congress becomes consumed by investigations, hearings, and political infighting, it leaves less time for dealing with issues that directly affect your life. Things like Social Security funding, tax changes, healthcare policies, and cost of living adjustments. Political distractions can slow down decisions that determine how much money ends up in your bank account each month. And when uncertainty spreads in Washington, it often spreads to the economy. Investors get nervous, markets react, and sometimes that uncertainty trickles down to retirement accounts, job security, and household budgets. So while this story might sound like a political headline, the ripple effects can reach far beyond Capitol Hill. That's why moments like this get so much attention, because political miscalculations don't just stay in Washington, they can affect the financial stability of millions of families across the country. The unexpected backfire. Here's where the story takes a dramatic turn. What was meant to be a strategic move is now being described by some analysts as a potential backfire. Instead of placing pressure only on political opponents, the push for documents and investigations may have opened the door to uncomfortable questions about figures closer to home. In politics, the term blowback gets used a lot. It describes the moment when a strategy meant to harm someone else ends up causing damage to the person who launched it. And that's exactly the fear some insiders are now expressing. As conversations about the Epstein files intensified, speculation began to grow. Commentators started asking whether the strategy had been carefully thought through. Others wondered if the political risks had been underestimated. And as the story gained traction, it began to shift the focus in ways that no one seemed to anticipate. Instead of a clean political win, the situation started to look messy. And in Washington, messy stories can spiral quickly. Once a narrative takes hold, it's hard to control. And right now, the narrative is shifting toward questions about whether this move was a strategic mistake. The media storm. Whenever a story like this breaks, the media attention comes fast and fierce. Cable news panels, political podcasts, and online commentators all jump into the conversation. And that's exactly what's happening now. The story has become a major talking point, with analysts on all sides offering their takes on what it means. Some are calling it a political miscalculation, others are framing it as a moment of accountability, and still others are saying it shows just how unpredictable Washington politics can be. But regardless of the angle, one thing is clear: the story is gaining momentum. And once the media spotlight locks onto a controversy, it rarely fades quickly. Every new detail, every new statement, every new rumor becomes another headline. The cycle feeds itself, creating more attention, more speculation, and more pressure on the people involved. For everyday Americans, this kind of media storm can create confusion. It becomes harder to separate facts from political spin. And in the middle of it all, people are left wondering what's really going on and what it could mean for the future. The reaction inside Washington. Behind closed doors, the reaction has reportedly been tense. Political insiders understand how quickly a story like this can escalate. What starts as a minor controversy can turn into a major political headache if it isn't handled carefully. Some lawmakers are said to be urging caution, warning that pushing too hard on sensitive issues can create unintended consequences. Others are doubling down, arguing that transparency is worth the political risk. This divide is common in Washington. Some politicians prefer aggressive strategies, believing that bold moves energize supporters. Others prefer a more cautious approach, worried about the fallout. And right now, those two mindsets appear to be colliding. The result is a sense of uncertainty. And in politics, uncertainty often leads to rapid shifts in strategy, messaging, and alliances. What seemed like a clear plan just days ago can suddenly become a scramble to control the narrative. What could happen next? So what happens from here? That's the big question. There are several possible paths, and each one could shape the political landscape in different ways. The situation could escalate into formal investigations, legal battles, or congressional hearings. Or it could fade if attention shifts to other issues. But one thing is certain. Once a story like this enters the public conversation, it rarely disappears completely. The Epstein case has a long history of resurfacing in unexpected ways, and each time it does, it brings new questions, new scrutiny, and new political consequences. For politicians, the next steps will be critical. Every statement, every decision, every vote will be watched closely. And one wrong move could make the situation even more complicated. The bigger political picture. This moment isn't happening in a vacuum. It's part of a larger political environment filled with tension, investigations, and high-stakes battles over policy and power. And when controversies like this emerge, they can reshape the political narrative overnight. Voters start paying closer attention. Poll numbers shift. Campaign strategies change. And suddenly, issues that seem distant become central to the national conversation. For you and your family, that can mean uncertainty, because political instability often leads to policy delays, and policy delays can affect everything from tax rules to benefit payments. That's why moments like this matter. They're not just political drama. They're signals about where the country could be heading next. So here's the bottom line. What started as a political strategy is now being seen by some as a possible misstep. And in Washington, one misstep can trigger a chain reaction that affects the entire country. The story is still developing. New details could emerge at any moment, and the direction it takes could influence political priorities, economic policies, and the stability of programs that millions of Americans rely on. That's why staying informed matters, because the decisions made in Washington don't stay there. They reach into your home, your budget, and your future. So keep your eyes on this story. Pay attention to the updates, and make sure you're following reliable information, because in times like this, knowledge isn't just power. It's protection for your family and your financial future.